One of the few open debates at the Labour Party National Conference this weekend was also the most profound about access for all Australians to voluntary assisted dying. Labour delegates voted to overturn a federal ban on telehealth appointments for voluntary assisted dying, or VAD. The Prime Minister personally opposes the change. Andrew Denton drove a long campaign to make voluntary assisted dying legal in Australia, recognised as one of the most powerful advocacy campaigns in modern Australian history, motivated by the painful death experienced by his own father, Kit. Andrew Denton, welcome to 7:30.
Thanks, Sarah.
What role would telehealth play in voluntary assisted dying?
Well, as it does in other areas of healthcare, acute care and on a daily basis with palliative care, it plays a role when the doctor determines that the person is too ill to travel, that it would cause too much harm, or that delay would cause too much harm. So in the case of voluntary assisted dying, you have to have multiple assessments. If it is just too hard to take somebody 100, 1,000 kilometres to go and see a doctor, and it's going to take too long for the doctor to get to them, then you would use telehealth.
Now, in expressing his objection to this change, were it to come, the Prime Minister said telehealth had the potential to be misused in voluntary assisted dying. How do you protect against off-camera coercion of any kind?
Look, I understand where the PM is coming from when he says this. He says the right checks and balances should be in place. If you look at the law as it exists, they are in place. VAD has been legal in Australia for 7 years. Over 7,000 Australians have used it. So we've had a good look at how it works. So if you just look at the law, if you're applying, you have to make 3 requests. You have to be examined by 2 doctors independent of each other, who incidentally are trained to assess for coercion. These aren't the only eyes on you. There's experienced nurses, care navigators that take you through the process. There's senior pharmacists that come into your house and deliver the life-ending medication. You have to have 2 witnesses who are not members of your family or beneficiaries of your will, who have to be there while you sign a paper in front of one of the doctors saying this is your voluntary wish. All these eyes are on you throughout the process. And if at any point any of those professionals think that your voluntariness or capacity is in question, they stop the process, and they have. And it's important to remember that you can stop the process at any time. And it's really instructive that 1/3 of people that have had the right to this medication have ended up not using it.
What is the cause, as you understand it, of the Prime Minister's reluctance? Because he understands
Yes.
all of these things that these levels of caution and care that you're describing. He knows that. So why is he still resistant, do you think?
I'm not entirely sure. He's always been supportive of that. He was very strong on restoring Territory's rights, so all Australians could have this. He says that he's concerned about it being misused, but the evidence clearly shows it's not. And I think it's worth looking at the coalition that has been pressing this change. It's not just members of his own party, even though, as I understand it, support was strong from across all factions. It's the AMA. It's the Law Council, it's more than 20 health organisations, and it's states, health ministers and attorneys generals. Now, these are not careless people. They would not be suggesting this change if they didn't understand that it was a safe and sensible change.
Obviously, the Catholic Church was part of resisting voluntary assisted dying coming into Australia at all. They've also spoken out against this additional change, saying that it would make it easier for the substances used for voluntary assisted dying being more easily abused or falling into the wrong hands. Is that a legitimate argument?
No, it's an argument completely without evidence and substance. Look, the Catholic Church are 2,000 years of no on this. They say that VAD is intrinsically evil, and they argue, as I think the former director of the Australian Christian Lobby put it, that euthanasia is getting in the way of God's plan for our suffering. They have a different view, and they're entitled to that view. But this is not a theological question. This is a question about clinical practice. And whether or not, if telehealth is used or not, none of the safeguards that have been exhaustively debated by our parliaments that exist in these laws are ever going to change. And also, it's important to remember that telehealth is not the first option here. all doctors would prefer to do a face-to-face consultation, but sometimes it's just not medically right or possible to do that, and that's when telehealth will be chosen.
So the next thing that happens is the Prime Minister said he was open to a conscience vote. Kate Chaney, Independent MP Kate Chaney, will introduce a private member's bill. What are your expectations for when that's introduced? What will happen?
Well, I'm hopeful that the Prime Minister will act on the wishes of his party. It's a conscience vote is not a conscience vote if it doesn't go before the Parliament. It's one thing to accept it at a party conference. It's another thing to put it before the Parliament. And what Kate Chaney's done, this bill's been sitting there for 2 years. It's about 110 words long, and it's quite simple. All it does is it takes states and territories' VAD out of the criminal prohibition on using telehealth. It doesn't change any of the safeguards around the existing laws. So it doesn't require special drafting or special ministerial approval. What it requires is the floor. The question before the Parliament is, should a law that was written over a decade ago, a criminal prohibition which has nothing to do with VAD, should that be impacting more than a decade later clinical practice under heavily regulated states and territory laws?
I mentioned at the beginning that you got into this campaign for voluntary assisted dying because of your father's suffering. Are you still doing this for him in a sense?
In a sense, but also because I see extraordinary unfairness and injustice happening. If I may, I'll give you one example which is relevant to this law. A man called Tom, his family would rather we use that name, who lived in far north Queensland, was dying of end-stage liver disease, was seeking to be eligible for VAD. Because of this prohibition, the first doctor had to travel 3,000 kilometres round trip to assess him. The second doctor, 2,500 kilometres. Then the first doctor, another 3,000 kilometres to witness his signed statement that this was his wish. 8,500 kilometres, 3 weeks, and the medication didn't reach him in time. Now, explain to me which of those kilometres protected Tom or made him safer?
Andrew Denton, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Sarah.